Hi, welcome to Fiberchats. My name is Irina. I'm the host here. My guest today is Katie Sullivan from Bobolink Yarns. Hi, Katie.
Hi, I was
I
so excited to join you.
I was so happy to meet you at Rhinebeck. It was actually yours is the only yarn I bought at Rhinebeck, believe it or not.
Which is astounding because most people walk out of there with a bag or two or a cart or an entourage of people to carry yarn for them.
Well, I loved your yarn, but I love the story of your yarn even more. So would you share it with my viewers?
Of course. So I started out with a sheep farm. In 2017, I bought a farm with my partner and we started raising blue-faced Leicester and border Leicester sheep. And what began to happen as I kind of expanded into both the lamb and the wool markets is that we had the most success selling yarn. And then, other shepherds who I knew would say like, gosh, you really sell a lot of yarn. Like, I don't have any clue about yarn. Like, I'm kind of in sheep for the lamb side of the business. And I've got this barn full of wool and no real plan for it. And, I just don't have time to kind of learn the yarn market. And then the other piece of kind of feedback that I got was from yarn shops saying, we'd really like to carry local yarn. People come in here all the time. They're looking for local yarn. Is there any chance like you have enough extra yarn from the festivals and shows that you do that you would be able to wholesale to us? And the truth was that even with 50 sheep, I didn't really have 50 sheep was enough to kind of supply Vermont Sheep and Wool, Rhinebeck, and a few other shows that I do, and really no more. So I couldn't focus on wholesaling. But then it occurred to me, well, I have friends and they have barns full of wool. And what if I connect Vermont's unused wool with yarn shops who want to stock local fiber? And I can make larger batches and make kind of a viable, sustainable amount of wool. So in 2019, I started Bobolink Yarns. And then in 2021, I got just out of the blue, some grad students contacted me and said that they were working on a project around upcycling. And I kind of was thinking, yeah, folks, I get a lot of random contacts and usually nothing kind of comes of it. But like, I'm always happy to talk to people about wool anyway. So I like chatted with them a little bit. And then, a few months later, I hear from the sustainability manager at Darn Tough Socks, which is a Vermont sock company. They make wool socks. They deal a lot in military contracts, but they also make civilian socks. So like hiking socks and things like that, kind of focused on fine wool. And they said, we generate like kind of unused overstock fiber, anytime we change colors, anytime we just more blue than red or something else, end up with a little bit of extra. And on our scale, it's not really usable, but maybe you could use it because that's some more unused wool in Vermont. It's not a barn full of raw fiber. It's pallets and pallets and pallets of already spun fine wool.
Oh.
So my project since 2021 has been, what can I do with all of this unused wool? So my world's kind of blown up insofar as like it used to be kind of 1,000 pounds to 2,000 pounds of raw wool, and now it's that plus 3 tons
Right.
of overstock
Well,
wool.
besides meeting you at Rhinebeck, I also met another very lovely lady who happened to be your mom.
Oh
And
yes.
what role does she play in your business besides being your helper at Rhinebeck?
Oh, yeah. So my mom learned knitting when she was just 7 or 8 years old and kind of delved really deep into it. She owned a yarn shop when she was in her 20s, and then kind of put that on hold. And my sister and I were born and kind of other life went on. But she's always been interested in knitting, and she always challenges herself to she always challenges herself to kind of to achieve mastery of whatever she's into. She became a professional kilt maker in her 40s because my sister was a Scottish Highland dancer for a little while. And so with my yarn work, my mom has really taken on the task of doing design. So like what we've learned is that the key to selling yarn is not just having yarn available, but showing people what to do with it. And especially with breed specific yarns, you know, knitters maybe want a little more, or fabric crafters, I should say, want a little bit more guidance with like, okay, what's the right way to enjoy this cheviot? It's not merino. I don't know if I want to make a cowl out of it, but like a hat might be really nice. So mom does design that kind of showcases the best of what each yarn has to offer. And so a lot of the designs that I offer to people is hers. In fact, I can just grab one real quick.
Sure.
Um, So this is a design that my mother wrote. It's a simple slip stitch pattern, and it uses one skein of rainbow cheviot and one skein of natural gray cheviot to achieve kind of an entertaining like color effect. That's really been one of my top sellers at local yarn shops, because kind of any level of knitter can make this, and it uses color in an interesting way, and it's a very wearable item. You don't have to, you know, be kind of strutting across the streets, down the streets of New York to look like relevant in this hat.
Well, talking about strong streets of New York, you didn't grow up on the farm. What
No.
was the decision like to go into the farming?
I grew up in a ranch house in a suburb, like a lot of folks do. But I had worked in social services for a number of years, and I was kind of looking for a way to care for myself a bit more. And I kind of got the idea that I'd like to work on a farm, so I went and worked at a goat dairy farm for a while. And then, you know, a few years in, and I was starting to have my own opinions about how I would want to raise animals. And the idea of sheep really kind of appealed to me, just because sheep are kind of goat adjacent, but like more manageable, and they felt like something I could do mostly on my own. And so I got 5 sheep for $250 plus delivery, and was off on my shepherding business when I was, gosh, 29 years old. Now in recent years, I sustained an injury, and I've been unable to continue to have sheep, just because you can't like
Right.
you can't raise sheep with one arm. And so that's changed a little bit for me, but I feel like I'm carrying on like my interest in sheep and my promotion of sheep, even
So
without my own at this point.
what did working with animals taught you about them?
Oh my gosh. Sheep are, I know it like, it's so hard to explain kind of what is so fascinating about sheep, because I think a lot of people like they have a reputation for being stupid and frustrating, right? To kind of folks like, what do you know about sheep? Oh, they're stupid. Like and this is not true. They just have a very different intuition than we do. And if you are trying to make a sheep behave like in a way that you expect, they're just not going to do that, right? They're going to behave in a way that they think will result in their self-preservation. So I had to learn to let go of a lot of my assumptions, and I had to learn how to actually, a lot of it was about what I learned from my sheep was about like regulating my own like body language, and like actually learning to control my own anxiety so that sheep would not respond to me as an anxious person. If you go into a flock of sheep and you're just kind of like radiating anxiety, the sheep will get anxious because they'll think that something bad's going to happen, or you're about to do something really awful. But if you go into your flock sheep and your body is calm and your mind is clear, then the sheep think like, okay, nothing bad's gonna happen. She's chill, we're chill. And so you can actually, that's a skill that you can learn. You can learn to force your body to relax. And that has been an incredible life skill to have generally. Whether whether I'm dealing with sheep or talking to somebody who's really upset, like either way, I can be calm and like exude calmness and bring calmness to a situation.
Oh, that's interesting.
And they're also, you know, when they know you and they trust you, they're so loving and nurturing. I have hugged sheep and cried on many occasions, and the sheep is like, this is weird, but okay. Right? And beyond that, they're soft and pettable and like, to me, really lovable. I think of sheep as wonderful friends to have.
Well, out of those 5, were you specifically close with any one of them?
The original 5 came from a farm where it had probably been about 10 years since the shepherd had been physically able to really handle his sheep. So they were breeding, and they, like, these sheep were younger than 10 years old, but they were kind of just being let out into a paddock and run into another one and not really handled. So those original sheep never ever became tame. But their daughters did, right? So the more time I spent with the flock, you know, the older ones who had grown up not being really hand raised were very like standoffish about humans. But every year I had 1 or 2 bottle lambs who would always be very human oriented. They would always come running. They would learn their names. They would as much as say mom when they see you, and just like gallop across the field to you, which is adorable when they weigh 20 pounds and really intense when they weigh 150. They're just like, mom, running for you. Gosh, one of my like most powerful and devastating moments was the first bottle lamb I had, who was a ewe. I named her Agnes, and she gave me a couple lambs. And then one year she had a really serious birthing situation, and we couldn't save her. And we had to choose to put her down and end her suffering. And it took so much, I think, inner strength to make the decision, like, we have to end her suffering. It is not kind to let her go on like this, and the vet can't do anything, so we're gonna make this decision. And I cried and I cried. I love that sheep so much. And yeah, it was a mess for about a week, because she was really like my, you know, it's like really letting go of a friend, but there wasn't anything else to be done for it. Like, it's just a tragic mishap that can happen for sheep.
Do you think because you worked with animals for a while, that it also gives you appreciation for what they give us, like that you have this extra level of appreciation of the wool?
Yep. Oh gosh, you appreciate the wool. You look at eating meat in a very different way. Like, it's not the, you know, these, you can never just walk into a grocery store and just like pick up some meat anymore. Like, it changes your perspective on that. But the wool also, you know, that this was, you know, wool that came from friends of mine, right? Wool that like I've cherished and nurtured from beginning to end, really means a lot to me. And that's kind of what I like to share through Bobolink Yarns as well. Like, I want people who knit with my fiber to appreciate all the love and care that goes into every step of creating it. And also the fact, like, it pays local shepherds a fair wage. It pays a local mill a fair wage. It is dyed in a sustainable way that's not kind of polluting rivers in other countries. And beyond that, like, it's kind of outside the global trade, you know, typical yarn, which might start in Australia, and then the wool goes to China, and then to Peru, and then to China, and then here through like several ports and lots of global trade. Like, this wool goes from Vermont to New York to Vermont to you. And that's it really like takes that order of magnitude of globalization and really personalizes it. So imagine like a really personal wool.
Well, when your mom is a knitter and a designer, what was your knitting story?
My knitting story is that I am able to knit, but I'm not really that skillful of a knitter, and I have a little bit of like kind of fine motor trouble, and so I don't knit that much. I think that, but I do really love the tactile sensation of yarn. Like what I actually love about what I do is creating a palette and a design of materials for knitters to love and enjoy, even though like that stage of the process is less like engaging to me. And I think in some ways that's like my greatest strength, is that I want to create like the paints that you use for your canvas, but not spend my time doing the painting. So I have more time to make more paint, right? That's really what I'm up to, is playing with color and playing with texture so that you can make something wonderful from it. And so I think the phrase that I always come back to is like, don't get high from your own supply, right? Like it's so easy to get a little bit like distracted by what one's personal taste is in knitting materials or in yarns. But I'm not attracted to that. Like I don't have that problem because I'm a little agnostic about like what is the best wool or yarn or texture or style, right? I'm willing to create anything that people respond to and enjoy. Matter that I don't knit much. I have knit a few things. I knit hats and mittens. I have a lot of like trouble reading patterns. I've got like my cognition is a little bit like customized. So
Well, when you think about yourself, like that day when you got this first 5 sheep, right?
yes. Oh gosh.
Like, what was that learning curve like? Because I mean, learning about all different kinds of breeds and learning about like all different kind of wool, like how did you learn that?
Oh, oh, Irina, I got my butt kicked a lot. Those first sheep, I thought that they would just come to the shake of a grain bucket, but they were wild and feral as gazelles from the plains, right? They wanted nothing to do with me. I put up my fence and I had one ewe named Janet who jumped over it every time. Janet just did not believe in fences, and I've never had a youth like that ever before or since. I was also a renter at the time. I didn't own property, so I was kind of, you know, like begging for space on other people's farms. And I brought my sheep down the road and a pair of very old, dear old shepherds who had had sheep long ago, and kind of had retired out of it. And they're like, yeah, they can be in our barn and we'll help you and we'll guide you. So a lot of it kind of came down to other people's guidance and help. Like I owe it all to my friends, really. But Jake and Priscilla were astonished to watch that same ewe jump a 5.5 foot fence, just clear it, just sail right over it. And I remember, I'll never forget Jake's face when he says, I can't believe that just happened, as she's like galloping away. Um, we ended up putting her, that was another lesson. Like we ended up putting her on the trailer with the lambs, with the ram lambs. She had to go because she was going to influence the other sheep to also escape. And then I was going to have a totally uncontrollable situation. So away she went. What was the learning curve like? Sheep aren't goats, but they're close enough to goats that a lot of what I learned about handling goats was applicable to handling sheep. But nevertheless, it took a number of years and a lot of birth experiences for me to feel fully confident in the things that I was doing and not doing. And every year presented a new problem. If it wasn't like a dry year with not enough grass in August, it was a parasite problem from a wet year. Or gosh, we like feed had gotten twice as expensive one year, and now we're gonna have to like change how we feed them. And like learning to make hay and feeding our own hay, and like changing the scale of the operation, going from 5 sheep to 55 sheep, like 55 ewes, and then at some point having like 130 sheep because all those ewes have had lambs. And to what losing my mind one March because every sheep was lambing within 1 week. Like we were just like go to the barn and I'm like, I can't believe there's more lambs here again. and I couldn't, you know, I never, I'm so bad about biting off more than I can chew, but when it gets to like, if you bite off more than you can chew, if you take on too much and now your like lives are at stake, now you start to think about like, this is not a matter of like missing a deadline or just being a little bit like day late and a dollar short about, you know, some small project. This is like, if you're not there, something's going to go very wrong.
Right.
We'll like lose lambs. So I had to learn to like keep my ambition manageable,
Well,
right?
what's your ambition is like now for the business? Like,
Oh my
where do
gosh,
you see it's going?
that is a huge question. Um, I'm for the wool that became the lace weight yarn. So there's a bunch of kinds of wool that I received from Darn Tough. And for what became the lace weight yarn, like that, I'm reasonably confident that like there's a market for that and that's going to be a successful venture. Um, the finer wools that were already dyed are kind of a question because I haven't found the right scale of manufacturer that can make something that I know that I can sell profitably and like pay myself and pay everybody who is kind of along the chain in the process. Um, and my journey right now is about being able to accept like this may work or it may not, and I have to go where the numbers lead me and not try to not, you know, lose money trying to make money trying to save a material that is beyond my like my capability to save. Does that make sense? Project may fall on its face or it may be an astounding success and the jury is out.
I mean, at this point, is it more for you about building a business, or is it more for you about basically like reteaching people about importance of wool and reviving this whole local wool industry?
Because I'm still a little bit inclined to take on too much, the answer to that is yes. It's all of it, right? You know, what feeds my body is selling yarn profitably, and what feeds my soul is going to yarn shops and talking to knitters about like what to expect when you use local wool. Like, it's not going to be superwash. We don't have access to that process because of matters of scale. It's not merino, and here's why, right? And like, but it's also like, it's wonderful fiber that has so many uses, and there's so many places where merino like isn't really the right material, but everybody's so used to it and so focused on soft that they don't realize that sweater will last 5 years and not 50 years because the elbows are going to wear out because you're using fibers too fine, right? Like, there's like that kind of the educational component is feeding my soul, but like it also has to feed my body, right? It also has to like pay for groceries, and that's the part where I need yarn shops to like want to stock it, which means I need knitters to want to knit with it. So it really is not one without the other.
I'll tell you like my frustration with that, because I don't see that information available anywhere. And I actually have a lot of people asking on my channel, like, interview somebody who can talk about different fibers and what they're good for and what different breeds of sheep are good for, right? Have you thought about like either creating your own YouTube channel and educating people about that, or writing a book, or doing some sort of talks?
No, not yet.
Talk about
I
it.
can give you a little taste of it right now, just talking about some of the wools that I have on hand. I mean, in my house, there is wool, right? So this is like, I am literally surrounded by like wool that I'm working on. Like, here's like a great illustration. This very floppy skein in my hand. I guess I should back up just a smidgen. In the Northeast, the major breeds on commercial farms that are lamb focused but raising wool sheep are kind of Cheviot, Dorset, down wool breeds. So breeds that have a springy, like squishy wool. This is not soft. This is probably like 28 to 32 microns. So like prickle sensitive people will feel a prickle on this, but it's not so coarse. It's not a Brillo pad, right? It's just like yarny yarn.
Well, hold on.
Very,
Let's back up even further.
sure. Okay.
If we're talking about Brillo pad, like where would that be micron wise versus this? Like what's the roughest wool you can find?
Oh, 50 microns for things that are really, and when we say carpet wool, that is not an insult. That is simply a wool that's appropriate for carpets, right? And if you want, you know, there's, I'm sure you know this, antique Persian rugs that have lasted hundreds and hundreds of years. And that's because they're not made with merino. That's because they're made with something like rugged and durable. And so that artisan's handiwork can be passed down over centuries because it's made with the appropriate kind of wool. So carpet wool, 50 microns, and like 40 to 50. Most people's kind of prickle radar is set to 30 microns. And so the proportion of fibers over 30 microns in a yarn are kind of governs the degree to which your average person will say like, ooh, that's a little scratchy, or like, no, it's nice and soft. Most of the wool that I deal with has some fibers over 30 microns, but predominantly slightly less. I'm kind of in the like more than 25, less than 32 department. And then within that category, like kind of within, and then merino, right, is going to be 24 and finer all the way down to like 14, 13 for the ultra finest. And that also applies to alpaca, because you can get coarse alpaca and fine alpaca. I'm not as skillful in the world of other fibers. So that's not like, sheep is kind of my domain. Within that like 25 to 32 realm is where most of your kind of meat breeds are. Like they're bred with a recognition that most people, like the carpet industry isn't that large, so there's much less demand for that ultra coarse wool. But once you start going finer, you start to lose some of the animal's capacity to grow meat, right? They can only direct their protein in, you know, one way or another, right? So either they're growing like nice thick muscles or lots and lots and lots of ultrafine wool, right? You can't, at some point you can't have both, right? You can't be both tall and short. It's not a off-road sports car. And so in that domain, there's down breeds and long wool breeds. Those are what I run into the most. So what I tend to get calls from is, I have a barn full of Romney, Border, Leicester, Coopworth, or I have a barn full of Texel, Cheviot, Dorset, sometimes Clonforest, but not what I don't get a call for about. Like I have a barn full of CVM Rommeldale. Never happens. Most people who raise fine wool sheep are doing it kind of either on a hobby scale for their own like fiber pleasure, or it's like overseas in Australia where the climate is more suitable for breeds like that.
Right.
So this skein right here is a perfect example of your down breed. This is Cheviot down breed wool, and it has this kind of spring. You squeeze it and it comes right back to shape. And that is perfect for hats and mittens and anything that you want to have cling. In a sweater, this is going to be kind of your structured, like boxy sweater, where the dimension that you knit it is kind of the dimension that you achieve. This is long wool fingering. This is some Coopworth. And so you can see just by the way that it hangs from my thumb that it drapes, right? If you knit a shawl out of this, it's going to look kind of boxy and blocky. If you knit a shawl out of this, it is going to follow the lay of your shoulders and the kind of the curve from your neck to your shoulder and over your shoulder. A sweater made out of this will also kind of drape and flow rather than kind of box and hold. However, you know, a hat or mittens out of this is not going to have the same kind of head grip. So like the main kind of duality of wools I have is kind of long wool versus down wool. So either kind of short staples and very springy, or like long curling staple and very drapey and flowy. So
Well, when I'm like listening to some historical novels, so like reading or watching some movies, right? There is this whole, like England during Tudor times used to be their main income for the country was wool.
Yes.
When did it happen in the United States that wool production became completely economically like?
This is the invention of the cotton gin, right? That was a moment where, I mean, cotton, first of all, like this is all bound up in slavery and human suffering to begin with.
Right.
But the seeds of cotton used to be hand picked, usually by enslaved people. And there was a moment when Eli Whitney invented a cotton gin, which is an automated de-seeding cotton picker. Once cotton seeds could be removed by machines, cotton went from a resource for only the ultra wealthy to something that many people could afford. So wool and linen shrunk as a proportion of the clothing that people wore. And the other and this is a Clara Parks, I believe it's from a Clara Parks book, but I'm not certain. But the invention of the washing machine was the final straw for wool clothing, because once it became possible to throw all your cotton garments into the wash and have it automatically washed instead of typically women, often like kind of in domestic servitude, doing the washing all day on Saturday, right? Saturday, I know that for my great grandmother, Saturday was like bread baking day and washing day. She would have been born in the 1880s. And so once washing machines became widely available, people just didn't want garments that couldn't go in the washing machine. And then wool really became a specialty fiber, and only the invention of the superwash process and kind of some recognition that we can't just all wear polyester and that cotton is not the right material for every endeavor, has brought wool back a little bit, but it is a pale shadow of its former self. I mean, in the 1900s, lamb was one of the main meats that people ate in the US. Mutton was a serious like food stuff, and there were recipes for mutton that everybody had. And as meat industrialized, this also comes back to wool, I promise. Like the more we industrialized meat and industrialized grain crops, the less lamb and mutton we had and the more chicken and pork we had, because now we can grow, 120 bushels per acre in corn to feed pigs and chickens. But lambs don't do that well in commodity, like kind of in confinement agriculture. Lambs are very sensitive. They have incredibly sensitive digestive systems, and they kind of tend to die in that situation. So you'll see that like Americans, I don't remember the statistic, but it was something like a lamb was like 20 to 40% of your diet, depending whether you lived in the North or the South. And it goes to like the average American eats less than a pound of lamb per year, right? Like people just.
So why is that important for you to support this industry?
Well, because what I learned from raising my own sheep, and I talk about this all the time when somebody calls me and says, I want wool, but I want it to come from a flock with no slaughter. And I'm like, wool, any given sheep gives you maybe 5 pounds of wool a year. And even if you would have to sell that wool for 5 pounds of clean wool at the outset, and you need to sell that wool for $40 a pound just to cover hay and veterinary costs, let alone infrastructure costs. So the lamb that comes from sheep, the extraneous male sheep that are raised every year, and substandard females, right? Those are that's the bread and butter of raising sheep.
Right.
Unless you are doing very, very specialty fiber, extreme specialty fiber. But for kind of your average flock with a large number of sheep, there has to be lamb sold just to keep the lights on. And wool is kind of something that adds to the value of sheep, but it's not the driving force. And so Americans no longer eating lamb kind of corresponds to a time when like people are demanding both less wool and less lamb kind of all at once. So after World War II, the sheep industry just absolutely collapses in the US. And the only, like really the thing that's kept sheep going worldwide is the fact that Australia has vast areas of open land that's not suitable for cattle and is suitable for sheep. And so you can keep sheep across thousands and thousands of acres of the outback without incurring tremendous expense. So that merino can be raised relatively cheaply. You can raise fine wool cheaply. And then the lamb from that is either the lamb in your, because merinos are not like well known to taste good and they don't have a good body composition for eating, kind of lamb for kind of poorer economies, and lamb for lamb and rice formula that your dog might be eating. So.
Right. Well, you mentioned that like, because you're not like as big of a knitting fan as your mom,
Mm-hmm.
do you still have like the absolute favorite fiber?
Oh, what's my favorite? I mean, you're asking me to choose my favorite child. Yeah,
Nobody
because
said it's gonna be easy.
I know. Oh gosh. I mean, oh, I have to say, like, I promise I'll choose a favorite. My favorite thing about this wool is that on a small scale, it is on a small scale sheep farm, like what this farm realistically is, even though they have 100 ewes now. It is economical for them to primarily breed black sheep, which is what they do. So they mostly their flock is mostly black sheep, which means I can bring you hundreds of pounds of natural gray yarn. And this is my most popular yarn at Rhinebeck, even though it's not the softest yarn you'll ever feel at Rhinebeck by any stretch, because it's this lustrous, shining, natural steely gray. And when you over dye that with green or blue or pink or purple, you get this like shining, like rich jewel tone that you cannot create with a white based yarn.
Well,
Like
why
it's
do you think I
impossible.
stopped by your store? Because I
Yeah, just
that
yeah,
one color that just like stopped me in my tracks.
really like shines. Yeah, so this yarn creates a color that you just can't get from some commercial base, like some global trade commercial base. It just will never ever make something like this. In terms of my personal style, this is, what I would knit myself a sweater out of, just because it's so fun and springy, and I happen to really love this flock. I love all the sheep. I mean, I love the BFL, like it's so lustrous. Yeah, they're all, I mean, every one of them is perfect for something. Every one of them is perfect for something. Probably, I guess that even though I wouldn't like knit myself anything out for my own use, because I don't tend to wear kind of flowy drapey, isn't really like what I tend to wear, but just the way that Coopworth shines, like nothing makes me prouder than showing people like that wool. Here's a totally different flavor of wool that you may have never experienced before.
How many colors do you guys dye now?
If anything, like that's kind of that's my greatest weakness, is that I don't dye the same colors all the time. I don't kind of pick a green and stick with it. I like create something new every time, so none of my colorways match. And so I dye as many colors as I feel inspired to create on any given day, kind of within reason to create a rainbow, because I want to have something for everyone. And I've, especially more recently, like kind of as diversity in knitting has been more of a discussion, created colors that are right for a wider variety of skin tones. So I'm thinking about like a greens with a lot of blue in them, and brighter oranges, and like more bolder yellows, to kind of capture a wider array of tastes and preferences. And you know what was most popular at Rhinebeck most recently was all of my ultra brights that I was able to do on the Darn Tough lace weight. Because that lace weight is superwash, it takes color very differently than farm yarns do. Farm yarns kind of are pastel no matter how you slice it.
Right.
There's nothing, I can't really make them brighter. But superwash yarns can be made absolutely like resplendently neon, and so I have really enjoyed making kind of brighter than bright, like real retina roasting colors, and they were incredibly popular, more so than I would have ever predicted.
So that was the one I got.
Yes, and the way that I created that was by dyeing the yarn green to begin with. And then as soon as it was fully saturated with green, I dipped it in a blue bath just for a few minutes and pulled it out again, just to create kind of a blue overlay on the green. And that's why it has both green and blue elements, but they kind of have like they're melded, right? And that's a technique that I use when I don't like the color I've made and I want it to be different, but not too different. And B, when I want something to have like semi-solid depth.
Right. Well, what was that learning like? It's one thing to raise sheep, right, from scratch, from like never doing, but then you're jumping into a completely different industry. Like, what was that learning process like?
Well, so the first year that I made yarn from my little flock of 5, I came to Vermont Sheep and Wool Festival, my first festival, with probably 80 skeins total that were one, 2/3 white and 1/3 gray. And we looked around as people kind of poked our yarn and walked away, that everybody else did a little bit better if they dyed their yarn some colors. So the next year, I thought, I'm going to learn how to dye my yarn some colors. And I made some really horrendous colors, just like nothing special, just it's blue. And then I got a little bit deeper into, I'm going to make a really dorky confession. I like kind of cheesy reality TV, and I'm not too proud to say that I've watched almost all of America's Next Top Model, RuPaul's Drag Race, Glow Up, which is about wearing makeup, even though I never wear makeup at all, and like a few others. And I've learned a lot about kind of like how to wear and model clothing, right? How to use color like in makeup, like to like color plus skin tone equals expression. And that's been a lot of where I learned, where I just kind of gathered ambiently like some color technique and some color thoughts about like what looks good on people, right? Like what kinds of colors like make you look alive and what kinds of colors make you look dead. And so I've taken a lot of that knowledge and also just like looking in, like what is the color palette of Banana Republic this year, right? Like what is the Pantone color of the year? What have been the Pantone colors of the last decade, right? Taking that information and creating yarns that are going to appeal to people's eyes and also make garments that they would want to wear. So that's been a lot of my basis of kind of how I've learned to create colors and how I've thought about colors. So like this skein here, and I know my camera is rather poor, but like this skein has like a lot of cool elements, but it's not straight cool colors. It needs like the warmth of this particular green to kind of set off this kind of blue gray periwinkle, just so that like to create visual interest in it, right? Otherwise it will look kind of dead. And I don't even have entirely the vocabulary to describe what I do with color, but I'm always kind of going like bigger, bolder, more saturated, and staying away. I almost never use the can of dye like as mixed. I'm always like adding a spoonful of something else to make it like different.
Well, in comparison to that first Vermont woolen ship where you brought 80 skeins, how many skeins did you bring to Rhinebeck this year?
I don't know. I think at some point I ran out of plastic bins and had to move on to cardboard boxes, and then ran out of cardboard boxes and brought some wool like in kitchen bags. Just like I had made at least three bins of like this multi. I just spent days. I mean, it took uh, Rhinebeck weekend represents about 3 months of preparation for me, right? Like 3 solid months of yarn scanning and hand dyeing and very like, labeling. Everything's labeled by hand. Like I have a lot of time to rewatch RuPaul's Drag Race because I'm just putting labels on yarn, like that. Like there's nothing else to do in this world. And Rhinebeck is also about, kind of 1/3 of like I guess how would I characterize it? It's about 1/3 of my annual retail revenue, but it's only by volume. It's a scant amount compared to the wholesale business. So I am like moving yarn. It's impossible to characterize. Most of the batches of wool that I have made right now are more than 50 pounds, like between 50 and 120 pounds of finished wool on cones comes to me like this. And that makes it possible for me to make like custom weight skeins, to sell it to, I can sell it to weavers, and I can sell it to folks with knitting machines on cones. They might prefer a cone format. And I have a partner who has a yarn club, and so I've been her supplier for a number of years. And that just makes everything flow, but still I could make, just based on the wool that I get is offered to me every week, Bobolink Yarns could be 20 times bigger than it is, because I have 400 pounds of Cheviot waiting for me somewhere in southern Vermont that I just haven't like quite directed to a purpose yet. I can't say yes. I can't just store it all, so I can't say yes until I know what's going to happen to it.
Well, when you think back, right, like to that day when you decided to buy those 5 ships.
Oh gosh, yes.
Like, can you imagine your life without wool now?
No, nope. No, it was really like it was really the first thing in my life that was fully my own, right? That was really just me. I mean, not like obviously my mom has helped tremendously, and it would not be possible without her. And like other people have made huge contributions to it as a project, but like something that I really like own and run, and like the skills that I've learned running my own business, not just working for others, have really, I think, made me who I am today. And like I gained the confidence to speak publicly about things, to give presentations, to like go and talk to other people. And then, what also keeps me going is the feedback that I get. Like nothing makes me happier than when somebody comes by a festival the next year and they're not at my booth to shop, they're at my booth to show me what they made with what they bought last year. And like, oh, this is the hat for my daughter and she loves it, she wears it every day. And just to know that like wool that would have been put in the compost has been made into yarn and lovingly dyed and made into a hat, and that hat is loved, and that hat is a symbol of love between the person who bought it and the daughter, is like this is like the love economy, right? We're taking love and we're moving it around. And it just happens to be fuzzy.
Well, next year I'm coming with whatever I'm gonna make out of these 2 skeins to say hi to you.
And I definitely stocked my yarns on Ravelry just to see like what people made and like what they thought, and I take constructive criticism to heart. Like somebody had said like one time I didn't wash the red out of like some skeins I dyed red quite enough, and like noted. So I learned to do a better job. Like I just learned to do a better job. So that's always been useful too. But yeah, this is I can't imagine my life without wool. And regardless of what happens next for me, whether my shoulder grows back and I get sheep again, or I it doesn't, and I don't, I know that like wool is going to be part of my equation for years to come.
Well, thank you so very much for being my guest today. I'm so glad
This is wonderful. I will talk about wool all day. Like people will definitely like start to yawn and like start to doze off, or just like start to back away slowly long before I'm done talking about sheep and wool. So anytime you have more questions, or if you see me at a show and you want to chat, I am always open to it. And if you want to bring me to your local yarn shop, I also do trunk shows and visits and chats. So
that's good to know.
yes.
Well, thank you so very much.
Thank you. I much appreciated. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.